We are here together to introduce the book of Paul Thek, The Artist. And at my right side is Bob Wilson, theater maker, and Peter Weibel, ZKM, and Graz, and Vienna, and he has activities all around Middle Europe, yes. And
his activities all around the globe.
All around the globe, yes. To get Bob Wilson here was rather nice, yes. It is very difficult to fix him to a spot. Anyhow, we have to speak about, or we want to speak about Paul Thek. That was an artist who was, in the time of when he died, nearly forgotten. But it turned out that that the artists considered him to be one of the most important colleagues. And it was up to Mike Kelly to write an essay in the early 19th to say that it is very easy to say why Paul Thek is so important for young artists, because most of the young art look like Paul Thek's art. That is a simple reason. And Paul Thek died of AIDS in 1988. He was born in 1933, so he died at the age of 55. And Bob Wilson became the president of the estate. Ted Bodine is also here. He's doing the job and as a director. And thank you very much. And after this essay, I think there was something which happened. There was a great retrospective in 95, 96, which was from Barcelona, Fondation Tapies, to Rotterdam. I don't know whether Chris Berkert is here, but he is in Basel, I know. And then it was in Berlin, in Nationalgalerie, and finally in Zurich. Yes, and this was the first time. And after that, it became silent again a little bit, and then it was picked up again, the idea to make a second retrospective, second work up, a roundup of his work. And that was an idea 3 years ago, created also by me as a collector, but it would not have been possible without the support of the state and naturally the support of the museums, especially of Peter Weibel. And we made this book, Mark and Wim, one of the, it is incredible, the work they did, the layout and all the texts. This is not a book on an exhibition, but an anthology. Yes, yes, that is a short view of it, and you have the book here, you turn it around, and later you can also buy it. We have 10 books available to buy. It is a bestseller, by the way. It is published by MIT in Boston, and it is for 12 weeks now the best sold art book by Amazon. So perhaps, but they sell it very cheaply in Amazon. I think for $37 or so. It's incredible. Here in Germany or here in Europe, it would cost more, like 50 euro. But the rest, if you want to have one, we would give away for 40. Okay, that is the test of ridicule. Bob, perhaps you can tell us a little bit how it came that you were in the end became the president of the estate.
Bob, we can tell the story, the feud that we had for 2 years to get the stuff. This is a very important story.
Which story?
The feud, how do you say? The quarrel you had with the family on the court.
Oh, yeah.
The 2 year quarrel at the court about the will.
That's true. I knew Paul from the late 60s. We met through Susan Sontag. He saw my early work in the theater. He felt an affinity with what he was doing and what I was doing. And when I presented my first major work in the theater in 1970, 71, 7-hour work that was silent, was called the Deaf Man Glance, the Regard de Sourds, that played for 4 or 5 months in Paris. Paul joined the company and performed in the work. And after that, I created a 24-hour play at the Opera Comique called Overture, and it was an overture for a 7-day play that happened in Persia in 1972, 73, and Paul made paintings that were in the 24-hour play, probably the largest painting he ever made, probably, let's see, about 8.5 meters by 7 meters. He did a painting of a dinosaur on a gauze, and then he did another series of paintings of volcanoes. This was during this 24-hour play at the Opera Comique in 1972 in Paris. And later in my loft space in New York, he worked with us and made paintings. He built a pyramid. He painted pink flamingos that would rise up out of the floor. And from that time on until today, I've worked mostly in Europe. And Paul had also, his work was mostly seen in Europe and not so much in America. So we had this in common. In the 70s, Paul's work didn't really fit in to what was happening. It was not necessarily a part of minimalism. It was not a part of pop. It was not a part of any movement. And he was sort of outside of it. And in a sense, my work was too. I remember at the end of the 60s, we saw together a big exhibition at the Whitney Museum, Art Against Illusion. It was a summation of the art of the 60s. And we both commented after that, well, what's wrong with illusion? And we were both fascinated by illusion. And through the years, Paul and I remained friends. We'd see each other from time to time, either in New York or in Europe. And towards the end of his life, when he was sick, I was one of the people that persuaded him to go to a hospital to get medical attention. And at the recommendation of friends of his, I asked him if he would make a will, and he refused. And the friend said, maybe I'd be the only one that could convince him to do it. And I said, Paul, you know, if you don't make a will, then all of your works will go to the state of New York and will be lost. So eventually he decided that he would make a will. He said, I will do it under one condition, if you will be the executor. And I tried to get him to...
And he said to you that was the biggest success in his career.
The best business deal. No, he always said that I was much better at business than he, and anyway, so I agreed. And as Peter said, soon after his death, he told me, he said, I don't want any of my father or my family to know that I've died. And they found out, and then they contested the will. And this went on for about 2 years in court cases. And I was a bit afraid that we would lose, because one can lose. But what saved us is at the end, the final court proceeding after two and a half years, we were in a federal court
New York.
in New York City, Lower Manhattan, and there was a woman judge. And we got Susan Sontag to come and speak. And she was great. She said, you know, I was there, and this is what Paul wanted. And I was with him in the last days, and this is exactly, he was in clear mind, and he wanted Bob to be in charge. And I was reluctant to do it because I can't even take care of my own work, and knew that how complicated Paul was, and the work was not documented. We didn't know where most of the work was, work in storage, bills unpaid. But it was really thanks to Ted Bonin and Dennis Redmond in my office that we began to archive and put together his work. And he told me, he said, you know, I have no work in an American museum. And within about 2 or 3 years after his death, we had placed works in most of the major American museums.
Yeah, okay, Bob. I wanted to ask you, Peter, you was one of the Vienna actionists, yes? And, but at that time, in the mid-60s, you didn't have any touch with his work, or was it the beginning when Harald Seemann made this famous show at the Documenta, where he was a part? When did you recognize, how would you say your relation to it?
We knew his work, but we have been hesitant. We have been hesitant because of this mythological. We have been very concentrated on the body, and then he was concentrated on the history of culture, on mythology and illusion, etc.
Yes.
We called our stuff action because we have also been part of this anti-illusion movement. And therefore we have been hesitant to embrace Paul Thek. We liked him, we knew his work, but we did not embrace him. But I wanted to add something to the story of Bob. As you know, Susan Sontag had a very close relationship to Paul Thek. As Harald has said the first time, the famous book of Susan Sontag, Against Interpretation, is dedicated to Paul Thek. Yes. Her second book, a famous book about AIDS metaphor, is also dedicated to Paul Thek. So when Paul Thek was dying, he wrote a letter, and I think this letter is printed in our book, right? Yeah? Because we, for the first time, we found out the correspondence in California, correspondence between Paul Thek and Susan Sontag. And here you can read that he wrote a letter, please marry me. Because when you marry me, then you are my widow and you will have the estate. But right. She was naturally reluctant. She did neither want to have his estate.
She was smart.
Exactly. So I tell the story. You see, she was much smarter. Fortunately, he was not smart enough.
Yeah, she said the best supporters afterwards are the widows. Yeah?
So she refused, first to marry him, and second to take his estate. And therefore, as a museum director, I'm so grateful for this really extraordinary achievement of you, Paul, that you take it, that you took the task to become his estate. Because even the person which was closest to him, who dedicated 2 times the famous books to him, to express her friendship, she refused to marry him to take the estate. Therefore, it's really it's a wonderful achievement of Bob Wilson that he took it, and now we have the pleasure that private collectors and museums have access to the work. And maybe also, Bob, you tell a little bit about what you have plans to do further with this museum in the basement.
Well, I have a center on Long Island called the Watermill Center. It's a center for the arts and humanities. And I plan to have an underground space in the name of Paul Thek, the Paul Thek Galleries, in which we will house some of his works, some pieces that are left in the estate, some of his notebooks. But I think more important, and the more I think about it, it'll be a space where young artists can show their work. And especially some of the younger artists that I'm thinking about today who are better accepted in Europe than in the United States. It would be a way of bringing their work back home, back to the US, but it would be a showcase for new and emerging art, and I think this would be in the spirit of what Paul would want. Paul was not someone necessarily who was so interested in institutions and his work being shown in theaters like I was showing my work, or in museums. He was interested in out-of-the-way spaces. I had a loft in Manhattan, and he used to tell me often that this is where art should be, this is how art should be seen, how it can be worked on collectively, integrated with the public, interactive with the public, made collectively together, bringing together people from different political, social, economic backgrounds, and to create a dialogue through art. And it's in this spirit of which I established in the 60s and 70s my loft in New York that I'm continuing with the Watermill Center. So I think in some ways it's appropriate to have these Paul Thek galleries located at this center.
Underground.
Underground. Which is also fitting, I think, for Paul, too.
Yeah, he liked to dive, yes?
Yes.
He liked to be underground.
Tombs.
Yeah, he liked to.
By the way, in the book is also the decision of the court.
Oh, yes.
It's very interesting to read it. It's on page 399 if you want to have a look at it. Okay.
Great.
Yeah, Peter, but it was not easy to find museums to do the job, yes? We were in contact with Lucerne, they said, and we, Cologne, Caspar Koenig wanted to do it, but then he said, oh, too difficult. I was very happy that you took it over. What was your major force to do it?
When you told me about the idea, I liked above the primary title of the show, Paul Thek in the context of contemporary art. This was a new conception, because, as you have said before, there was already an exhibition, a kind of retrospective, 15 years earlier, from Rotterdam, Zurich, etc. But your conception to embed him into contemporary practice, precisely what also you said, Bob said, people who are in the course of Paul Thek. And last summer you have invited Jonathan Mese to make something in Watermill, and all these young artists which clearly derive, so we said, from Paul Thek. So we've been sitting together also with the director of MNK, Gregor Jansen. We have discussed a selection of younger artists which are now very successful, but it's very clear that they have a context and a relationship to Paul Thek. And this new idea of a kind of contextual retrospective, which you proposed, I liked very much, so I said immediately yes. Then on the other side, we at ZKM, we are specialists, really specialists to rediscover major figures which were forgotten a little bit by certain circumstances. No? So we like to do exhibitions with difficult figures. So I'm very proud that people like you say this is the only place where you can make a kind of show which is so difficult. Because there's also a famous intellectual from France. His name is Bruno Latour, one of the biggest philosophers and sociologists. He also made exhibitions with us. They said also the only place where you can make this kind of intellectual and artistically demanding and complex shows is ZKM.
And I think the idea was also, we published this book with Roger Conover.
The very important thing was that
MIT Boston.
that we have very good relations, that most all of our bigger shows we do together with MIT Press, which is, in my opinion, the best cultural publisher, not only about art, but also architecture as a visual culture, the best publisher in the world about culture, and we have this good connection. So it was also attractive for you when I could promise you this book will be published in the homeland, in the homeland, not in Europe, in the homeland in America, to put him back to America.
There will be some. It is there are two shows which are planned in the United States. I think in 2011. Is it correct? Yes, 2011. Oh, 10, 11. Yes, that is in Los Angeles, LA County Museum, and in Whitney Museum in New York, and. We all hope that this will work out. It is not easy. There are financial stresses in the United States, and 80% of the works are in Europe, I believe, or maybe 7. But it is very important for a show here to get the sub-works over to here and going back to the United States. And it was only possible, Bob, because you said yes, because we had a lot of very important works from the States. So thank you again. So I think we will pay it back and give you our pieces for the United States.
And as you see,
yes?
and as you see, when you have a publisher like MIT with such a great distribution, it was these are the reasons and the quality naturally of the book itself. That it has now since 12 years is at Amazon the number 1. And in New York, when you go in the bookshops in New York, it's in the entrance of the bookshop. You have these tables which say art bestseller books, and the book is everywhere. So we are very happy as a European museum together with a European collector, with American support, to put back Paul Thek in the field, on the map. Because his work, as you have said, Harald, from the beginning, is very influential for contemporary practices.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that was more or less it, and hope to have given you an idea. The other things you can look up in the books. Some are to be sold, and the rest are to be ordered. Or that's not the point. I hope that we have given you an idea of an artist who really deserves to be rediscovered. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there enough time for questions or so?
We have some questions.
Is there time for questions? No questions.
Whitney Museum.
I think end of 2010. End of 2010 at Whitney, and then to Los Angeles.
Will there be an exhibition in Paris as you speak about Latour?
No, it's not planned.
Latour, he made exhibitions, 2 exhibitions with us. One was called Iconoclash, the other was called Making Things Public. Also 2 big books he published again with MIT Press, and they have been this exhibition. So Bruno, you see, he cannot make a show in Paris, but he can make big shows together with us inside camp. And now we are very happy to have a show also, Falckenberg and me and my other museum in Graz about the wound portraits by Bob Wilson. We have a tour now of his. He makes his portraits with video since 2004. We are very happy.
Some of them are here on the show.
Some are here?
Yeah, yes.
So it's about between 40 and 50 portraits we will show.
But there was a question.
I was just wondering about his theatrical performances. Is it possible to see them in the shows, or do you have any kind of recording of his performances?
We have a few videotapes, audio recordings of Paul playing a guitar, singing, performing. He, like myself, we were doing everything at the same time. We were building the sets ourselves. We were performing with friends. A lot of the people that were performing in my work would go and work with him in setting up an installation in a museum. And everyone participated in doing everything, from making a meal to constructing props or scenery or painting or writing. It was a co-op.
As a formal personal friend of him, did you like this mixing up with the young successful artists and this show? Did you like this concept? Did you like this concept?
The show you have seen at Thek.
The show.
Oh yeah, no. I think it was. To me, it was overwhelming. It was unbelievable that I would have never dreamed that one could pull together a work of Paul's, because most of what Paul did disappeared. It was made with chicken wire, newspaper, and it was. At that time, we were not concerned about works lasting. necessarily. We made an installation. I made a 24-hour play. It was never going to happen again. It was like a shooting star. It happens once. So you come together, you work for a year or something to make an event, and you celebrate, you invite people to come in and share it with you, and we never thought about it happening again. I remember Lincoln Kirsten saying somewhere in the 60s or early 70s about modern dance. He said, modern dance will have no tradition. And we didn't think about it necessarily having a tradition. And I think Paul would be very surprised to see someone like Jonathan Misa's work, which has definitely been influenced, or Damien Hirst, or Kiki Smith, and all of these artists that are, Bob Gober, that have been influenced by Paul. I mean, Paul was really out there following his own drum and dream and path, and it didn't really relate to anyone else. And we didn't think about it having a future.
Yeah, that was also part of this concept, because to make a real retrospective of Paul Thek is very difficult. You cannot reconstruct most of his works because he did it very much in the space. If you have another space, it looks differently. So you are not in his head. So
and it was very much about the people who were making it, and the people who were making it were a part of it.
Yeah.
And
so it was a good idea to relate it to something else, and to be not too scientific about it, but in a way to recreate him and not
the spirit. I mean, to recreate the spirit.
Yes.
It's a mentality.
Correct.
So my answer to your question would be, we have been very happy that afterwards the show was going to the famous Reina Sofia in Madrid. We have been very, very happy because later Madrid is a bigger place like Karlsruhe. And even when Zed came, it's great. Reina Sofia is even greater because it has a longer tradition and bigger collection. So we have been very proud and happy that the work of Paul Thek was accepted at Reina Sofia in Madrid and deserves another international attention. But now comes the point, my answer to your question. They showed only Paul Thek, not the context. And for me, personally, maybe Ted, you have another opinion. For me personally, the show, unfortunately, was weaker than our show. Because for the work of Paul Thek worked better, looked much better in the context of younger artists, when you showed it alone in a very classical way in Madrid. Ted, what you say? It was, you missed this element too. Yes. This is, yeah. It was a beautiful show, but we missed this element. No? So it was
the great thing that they did, they brought in
yeah.
artists of our time, contemporary artists, and so you could see the relationship. That brought the spirit into the piece. And Reina Sofia, maybe that's what's lacking. Is it's like a museum that's collecting work of a dead person, a little bit like a morgue. And how do you bring in the spirit that was there in the work originally? That's very difficult to do, because you can't recreate the pieces because they don't exist. And for someone else to recreate them doesn't work. It was the housewife from New Jersey, who was building something in chicken wire. There was a young 18-year-old girl from White Plains who was painting and drawing for the first time in an exhibition. This was the spirit of the work.
But for me, I'm out of a generation which had never the chance to see an original Paul Thek exhibition. I'm too young for that.
Right.
So I was very obsessed and very happy about seeing these Paul Thek pieces, because the surrounding I know very good. So
you would have preferred only Paul Thek?
For me as an artist, the spirit of Paul Thek was even stronger, because you feel that attitude doing art just for art, and which is in my generation, which is quite commercial, not there anymore. So
I see.
This was why I asked you this question.
You had the impression in Karlsruhe that the work of the younger generation was more commercial and was not really the true revolutionary spirit which you saw in the work of Paul Thek.
Yeah. For me, it was definitely like.
I can accept this criticism. No? I can live with it.
Okay. So I think
You can live with it, Harald?
yeah, yeah.
You can live with it? You can live with this?
I can perfectly live.
I think that's an interesting point because we are looking at it from different levels of familiarity with the work and history. So one thing just to add to this is one should say that the Reina Sofia, because of its status as a museum that collects art and has a kind of larger staff, was able to borrow some additional works that were not available because for a kind of more Kunsthalle sort of institution, these other museums would not lend. So in fact the Reina Sofia show was yet even a different show. One would not say it was the same show minus the contemporary context. It was without the contemporary context, but it then had another element as well.
It was a different show then, right?
Yeah, okay, then I think we should close the session, and I thank you very much, and have a good look into the book. Yes. Then you can see something. Thank you.